Black waitress gets fired after helping Melania Trump. The next day she receives a life-changing surprise. The elegant chandeliers of the Blue Rose Bistro bathed the restaurant in a warm golden glow, the scent of rosemary and butter filling the air. The place was buzzing with wealthy patrons, each one demanding their meal like royalty. Keisha adjusted her apron, forcing a polite smile as she hurried between tables. It had been a long night, and her feet were aching. But she couldn't afford to complain, not when she needed this job to survive. She had dreams. Big ones. College, a future, a life where she didn't have to struggle for every single dollar. But right now, dreams didn't pay rent. Just as she balanced a tray of expensive wine glasses, she heard whispers ripple through the room. "Is that who I think it is? Why would she be here?" Keisha turned and froze. Sitting at the corner booth, elegant as ever, was Melania Trump. Keisha's heart pounded. She had served celebrities before, but this was different. She had seen Melania on TV, on magazine covers, always graceful, always composed. Now, she was her customer. Taking a deep breath, Keisha approached the table. "Good evening, ma'am," she said, her voice steady. "Welcome to Blue Rose Bistro. May I start you off with some water or perhaps a glass of wine?" Melania looked up, her expression unreadable at first. But then, a soft smile. "Water please," she said. "And, what do you recommend?" Keisha was stunned for a moment. Melania Trump was asking for her opinion? She quickly regained her composure. "Our house specialty is the rosemary grilled salmon. It pairs beautifully with a citrus glaze." Melania nodded. "That sounds lovely. I'll have that." Keisha jotted down the order, relieved that she had handled the interaction well. But as she turned to leave, something happened that would change everything. From across the room, a man scoffed loudly. "Oh great. Now we're serving traitors?" The words cut through the restaurant like a knife. Keisha's stomach dropped. The man, a well-dressed businessman, sneered at Melania. "I didn't think I'd have to see you here." The restaurant went dead silent. Melania didn't flinch, didn't react. Her composure was perfect. But Keisha? She couldn't stand there and say nothing. "Sir," she said carefully, "I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice. Other guests are trying to enjoy their meal." The man turned his glare toward her. "And who are you to tell me what to do?" Keisha held her ground. "I'm your waitress. And we treat all our guests with respect." The man's face twisted with anger, but before he could say another word, Melania finally spoke. "I appreciate that, Keisha," she said gently. Keisha blinked. She knew her name? The businessman scoffed again. "Unbelievable." He shoved his chair back and stormed out. The tension in the restaurant lingered. Keisha felt her hands trembling, but she took a breath, trying to shake it off. Then she heard her manager's voice. "Keisha, my office." Now, her stomach turned to ice. She followed him into the back, her pulse racing. As soon as the door shut, he rounded on her. "What the hell was that?" Keisha swallowed. "I was just..." "You embarrassed a paying customer." He was out of line. Her manager's eyes narrowed. "You don't decide that." "I do." Keisha's hands clenched. "So what? I was supposed to let him insult her?" "Yes." Her chest tightened. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. "You're done here," he said coldly. "Leave your apron and go." Keisha's breath caught. "What? You're fired." The words hit like a punch. Her eyes stung, but she refused to cry in front of him. Not now. Not like this. Slowly, she untied her apron and placed it on the desk. Then, with her head held high, she walked out. Her coworkers stared as she passed, their eyes filled with shock and pity. But no one said a word. No one stood up for her. And as she stepped into the cold night, her heart heavy with betrayal, she wondered if anyone ever would. Keisha walked down the dark streets of the city, the cold air biting at her skin. Her uniform felt heavier now that she wasn't wearing it as an employee, but as someone who had been thrown away, discarded for doing the right thing. She replayed the moment over and over in her head. Was she really wrong? Had standing up for someone, for Melania Trump, of all people, really cost her everything? The thoughts gnawed at her as she reached the small apartment she shared with her younger sister, Maya. Maya was already sitting at the kitchen table, Textbooks spread around her when Keisha walked in. The second she saw her sister's face, she knew something was wrong. Keisha forced a smile, but it barely reached her lips. "Hey Maya. How was school?" Maya squinted at her, immediately sensing something off. "It was fine. What's wrong?" Keisha sighed, dropping her bag onto the counter. "But I lost my job." Maya's eyes widened. "What? Why?" Keisha hesitated, then told her everything. The restaurant, Melania Trump, the rude customer, her manager's unfair decision. When she finished, Maya slammed her textbook shut. "That's ridiculous. You were defending her. You didn't do anything wrong." Keisha let out a bitter laugh. "Well, apparently, standing up for what's right doesn't pay the bills." Maya frowned. "What are we going to do? Rent is due soon." Keisha swallowed hard. She had been saving every tip, every extra hour she could get at the restaurant, and now it was all gone. "I'll figure something out," she promised, even though she wasn't sure how. Maya reached for her sister's hand. "You always do." Keisha squeezed her sister's fingers, holding back the fear bubbling inside her. But she didn't know that everything was about to change. The next morning, Keisha's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. She groggily reached for it, expecting spam emails or overdue bill notices, but what she saw nearly made her drop the phone. Hundreds of notifications. Texts, emails, social media alerts. Her hands trembled as she tapped on one. Keisha's story goes viral. Waitress fired after defending Melania Trump. She gasped. The headline wasn't from some random blog. It was on a major news website. She quickly scrolled through the comments. People were furious. "This is insane. She did the right thing. Boycotting that restaurant immediately. Where's Melania Trump in all of this? She needs to step in." Keisha's heart pounded. This couldn't be real, right? Then, her phone rang. An unknown number. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello." A voice, calm and graceful, filled the line. "Keisha? This is Melania Trump." Keisha's breath caught in her throat. Melania Trump. Calling her. She almost dropped the phone. "Ma'am, I heard what happened to you," Melania said, her voice warm but firm. "And I wanted to tell you personally, this is unacceptable." Keisha blinked, struggling to process. I thank you, ma'am, but..." Melania cut her off gently. "You should not have lost your job for doing the right thing. And I do not take that lightly." Keisha swallowed. I appreciate that, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do now. I need that job." There was a pause. "But I would like to meet with you," Melania said. "There is something I want to offer you." Keisha froze. "Offer? What do you mean?" she asked carefully. Melania's voice remained calm. "I think it's better we talk in person." Keisha could barely breathe. "Okay," she whispered. "Good," Melania said. "I'll send someone to pick you up." Before Keisha could even respond, the line clicked off. She sat there, phone still in her hand, heart pounding. Maya rushed into the room, eyes wide. "What's going on? Your phone's been going crazy." Keisha turned to her sister, voice barely above a whisper. "Melania Trump just called me." Maya's jaw dropped. And before either of them could say another word, a black SUV pulled up outside their apartment. Keisha stood frozen, staring out the window at the black SUV parked outside. Her breath hitched. This wasn't a dream. This was real. Maya grabbed her arm. "Keisha, is that for you?" Keisha slowly nodded. Melania said she was sending someone. Her sister's eyes widened. "What if it's the Secret Service?" Keisha swallowed hard. Only one way to find out. Her feet felt like lead as she walked toward the door. This wasn't normal. Waitresses didn't just get fired and then have former first ladies sending cars for them the next day. She opened the door cautiously. A sharply dressed man in a black suit and earpiece stepped out of the SUV. He looked exactly like the kind of person you'd see guarding the most powerful people in the world. "Miss Keisha?" he asked. She hesitated. "Yes?" "Mrs. Trump is expecting you," he said smoothly, motioning to the car. "Shall we?" Keisha's heart pounded. Maya grabbed her hand, whispering, "Are you seriously going?" Keisha exhaled. "I think I have to." Maya squeezed her fingers. "Be careful, okay?" Keisha nodded and stepped toward the SUV. The door swung open, and the driver gestured for her to get in. As soon as she slid into the luxurious leather seats, the door shut, sealing her inside. And then, the car pulled away. The ride felt surreal. Keisha tried to keep calm, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. The city blurred past, but she barely noticed. Was this really happening? After a while, she gathered the courage to speak. "Where are we going?" she asked the agent in the front seat. "To meet Mrs. Trump," he said simply. Keisha swallowed. "And what does she want?" The man didn't answer. That only made her more nervous. 30 minutes later, the SUV pulled into a gated estate. The property was massive, the kind of place she had only seen in magazines. The car stopped in front of the entrance. A butler opened the door for her. "Right this way, Mississippi." Keisha's heart raced. She stepped out, her shoes clicking against the polished stone driveway. Then the doors opened. And there, standing in an elegant beige coat, was Melania Trump herself. Keisha's breath caught. Melania looked exactly as she did on TV, poised, graceful, and intimidatingly beautiful. But there was something in her expression, a softness. "Keisha," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "Welcome." Keisha forced herself to speak. "Mrs. Trump, I don't even know what to say." Melania gave a small smile. "Come inside. We have much to discuss." Keisha followed her through the grand hallway, everything about this place screaming wealth. And then they sat down. Melania folded her hands elegantly. "I want to talk about what happened to you." Keisha exhaled. I was doing my job. I didn't think it would turn into all this." Melania nodded. "You stood up for what was right. That should never be punished." Keisha swallowed. "I still lost my job." There was a pause. Then, Melania leaned forward. "And I want to change that." Keisha's eyebrows furrowed. "What do you mean?" Melania's expression was unreadable. "Tell me, Keisha, what do you want out of life?" Keisha blinked. "Excuse me?" Melania smiled slightly. "If you could do anything at all, what would it be?" Keisha hesitated. "I've always wanted to go to college. To get a real career. But I can't afford it." Melania's eyes softened. "What if I told you that you no longer had to worry about that?" Keisha froze. "What?" Melania's voice was gentle, yet firm. "I want to offer you a full scholarship. To any school of your choice." Keisha's breath caught. She had to have misheard. "A scholarship?" she echoed. Melania nodded. "And that's not all. If you want to work, I will personally ensure you have a position in an establishment that values you. Somewhere that treats people with dignity." Keisha's head was spinning. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. I don't know what to say," she whispered. Melania smiled. "Say yes." Keisha felt her eyes well up. For the first time in forever, she saw a future. A real one. A future where she wasn't struggling just to survive. A future where she could finally breathe. She took a shaky breath. And then, voice full of emotion, she finally said the words. "Yes." Keisha sat there, her heart hammering in her chest. She had just said yes to an offer that could change her life forever, and yet, part of her still couldn't believe this was happening. Melania Trump smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "Good. Then it's settled." Keisha opened her mouth to speak, but her words got stuck. I don't even know what to say. I never thought something like this could happen to me." Melania reached across the table, gently placing a hand over Keisha's. "You earned this. Not because of what happened at that restaurant, but because you are strong. You stood up for what was right, and that means something." Keisha swallowed hard, emotions threatening to overwhelm her. No one had ever told her that before. She had spent most of her life struggling, working tirelessly, believing that people like her didn't get lucky breaks. But here she was. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "What happens now?" Melania leaned back in her chair, a small smile playing on her lips. "We move forward." At that moment, the butler returned, holding a folder. He handed it to Melania, who slid it across the table to Keisha. Keisha hesitated before opening it. Inside were official-looking documents, an acceptance letter from a university, and financial forms marked full scholarship. Her fingers trembled as she flipped through the pages. I don't understand. How did this happen so fast? Melania chuckled softly. When you have the right connections, things move quickly. Keisha shook her head in disbelief. This is real? Melania nodded. All you have to do is sign. Keisha's breath caught. What if I don't deserve this? Melania's expression turned serious. You do. Keisha bit her lip, trying to process everything. She had spent her whole life being told that she had to fight for every scrap of success, that nothing came easy. Now, here was a woman offering her a future on a silver platter. It didn't feel real. But deep down she knew it was. With a deep breath, she picked up the pen and signed her name. As soon as the ink dried, Melania smiled. Welcome to your new life, Keisha. The drive back to her apartment felt surreal. Instead of taking the bus home, she was in the back of a luxurious SUV, escorted by Melania Trump's security team. She glanced out the window at the passing city lights, her mind still racing. Everything had changed in a matter of hours. She wasn't the same Keisha who had walked into her shift the night before. She wasn't the same Keisha who had been fired for doing the right thing. Now she had a future. As the SUV pulled up to her apartment building, she spotted Maya sitting on the front steps, scrolling through her phone. The second Maya saw the car, her jaw dropped. Keisha barely had time to step out before her sister ran toward her. What is happening? Maya blurted out. Your face is all over social media. People are talking about you. There's a hashtag justice for Keisha. Keisha blinked. What? Maya shoved her phone into Keisha's hands, and sure enough, her name was trending. People were furious at the restaurant for firing her, calling for boycotts, and praising her for standing up for Melania Trump. Keisha felt a wave of emotion crash over her. Just 24 hours ago, she had lost everything. Now, the world was on her side. Maya frowned, suddenly noticing something. Wait, whose car is that? Keisha exhaled. Melania Trump's team brought me home. Maya nearly fainted. Excuse me? Keisha laughed for the first time in what felt like forever. I have so much to tell you. Over the next few weeks, Keisha's life completely transformed. The restaurant that fired her closed down due to massive backlash. Her story was picked up by major news outlets. She was invited to interviews, praised for her integrity, and even received job offers from people who wanted to work with someone who stood up for what was right. But more than anything, she had a future. Melania had kept her promise. Keisha's scholarship was secured. She was going to college, something she never thought would be possible. One day, while packing up her things for school, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Never stop fighting for what's right. I'll be watching your success. M.T. Keisha smiled, tears welling in her eyes. She had no idea what the future held. But for the first time in her life, she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. The day Keisha stepped onto campus for the first time, she almost couldn't believe it was real. The sprawling university grounds stretched before her, students buzzing around in every direction, backpacks slung over their shoulders, chatting, laughing, moving towards something she had always dreamed of but never thought she'd have. A future. She adjusted the strap of her own brand new backpack, a gift from Melania Trump herself. It was still surreal. The woman who had once been First Lady had given her a full ride to college, changed her entire life with a single act of kindness. And now, Keisha was walking onto campus, not as a struggling waitress, but as a student. Her heart pounded as she made her way toward the main hall, where new students were gathering for orientation. She spotted a few people glancing at her, not with judgment, but recognition. People still remembered her story. It had been months since the viral moment that changed everything, but the world hadn't forgotten. Neither had she. As she found her seat in the large auditorium, she pulled out her phone, scrolling through messages from Maya. Maya, how's it going? Are the rich kids annoying yet? Keisha smirked, shaking her head as she typed back. Keisha, haven't met enough of them yet to tell? Maya responded instantly. Maya, if anyone messes with you, remind them that Melania Trump personally put you here. Keisha chuckled. It was funny, but also kind of true. She exhaled deeply, taking in her surroundings. This was real. She belonged here. But just as she was about to tuck her phone away, another message popped up. This one was from an unknown number. Her stomach tightened. She hesitated before opening it. Unknown, you don't know me, but I just wanted to say, your story gave me hope. Thank you for standing up for yourself. You inspire people like me. Keisha's breath hitched. She read the message again, and this time, it sank in. Her story wasn't just hers anymore. It had become something bigger, something that had given people hope. She had spent her whole life believing she was just one person, powerless against the world. But maybe she had been wrong. Maybe one person could make a difference. Maybe she already had. Over the next few weeks, Keisha settled into a new routine. Classes were challenging, but she worked hard. She spent hours in the library, absorbing everything she could, determined to prove that she belonged here. She made new friends, met professors who actually cared about her success, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't constantly worried about money. But the biggest shock came one afternoon when she received an email from a private number. The subject line read, "Would you be interested in a meeting?" Keisha frowned, opening the message. Inside was a short but life-changing offer. 1 week later, Keisha sat at a polished mahogany table in a high-rise office building, fidgeting slightly in her chair. The New York skyline stretched outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, and across from her sat an executive from a major nonprofit organization. "You've become somewhat of a public figure," the woman said, flipping through a folder. "Your story resonated with millions. And we think you would be a perfect fit for our new initiative." Keisha listened carefully. "We're launching a program for young people from underserved backgrounds, helping them access education, mentorship, and opportunities they never thought possible. And we want you to be the face of it." Keisha's stomach flipped. "Me?" The executive smiled. "You're living proof of what can happen when someone gets the chance they deserve. And we think your voice could inspire countless others." Keisha sat back in her chair, her entire life flashing before her eyes. The night spent working doubles, the exhaustion of barely making ends meet, the humiliation of being fired for doing the right thing. And now she was being asked to help others who had walked the same path she had. She took a deep breath. "I don't have experience with public speaking or running programs," she admitted. The executive smiled. "That's okay. We'll help you. But the heart of this program is you." Keisha's mind raced. This was more than just a job. This was a way to give back. To make sure no one else felt as powerless as she once had. She thought of Maya. Of all the people who had reached out to her, telling her she had inspired them. And in that moment, she knew her answer. She straightened her shoulders and met the executive's gaze. "I'd love to be part of this." The woman beamed. "Welcome aboard, Keisha." As she shook hands with the executive, it hit her. This wasn't just about what had happened to her. This was about what came next. She had fought for herself. Now she would fight for others. Keisha walked out of the high-rise building and onto the bustling New York streets, her mind spinning. The past few months had changed her life in ways she never could have imagined, and now she had just taken the next step, one that would allow her to help others the way she had been helped. She glanced down at her phone, her fingers hovering over Maya's number. She had to tell her. Maya answered on the first ring. "Well, what happened?" Keisha couldn't help but laugh. "I said yes." Maya screamed so loud that Keisha had to pull the phone away from her ear. "Are you serious?" "Oh my God, Keisha, you're going to be famous." Keisha rolled her eyes but smiled. "It's not about that. It's about helping people. This program could actually change lives." I know, Maya said, her voice still filled with excitement. "I'm just so proud of you." Keisha's heart swelled. "I wouldn't be here without you." Maya sniffled. "Don't make me cry. I have class in 10 minutes. Keisha laughed again. "Okay, go to class. I'll call you later." As she hung up, she took a deep breath, letting the moment sink in. She had always believed that life was about surviving. But now she was learning that life was about thriving. 6 months later, the event hall was packed with young students, all sitting eagerly in their seats. Keisha stood at the front, her heart pounding as she stepped up to the microphone. This was it. Her first speech as an official ambassador for the program. She glanced down at the audience, dozens of young men and women who had grown up just like she had. People who had dreams but didn't think they had a chance. People who just needed someone to believe in them. She took a deep breath and began. 6 months ago, I was just like you, she said, her voice steady but full of emotion. I was working hard, trying to make ends meet, thinking that was all life had to offer me. She let the words sink in before continuing. Then something happened. I stood up for what was right. And for that, I lost my job. There were murmurs in the crowd. Some of them had heard her story. Others were just now realizing why she was standing there. But what I didn't know at the time, she continued, was that losing my job was the best thing that ever happened to me. Because it led me here. To this program. To this opportunity. And now, she smiled. Now, I'm here to tell you that you don't have to wait for someone else to change your life. You have the power to change it yourself. The room went completely silent. Keisha looked out at them, at the hopeful faces staring back at her, and she knew this was where she was meant to be. She wasn't just living for herself anymore. She was living for all of them. 1 year later, the restaurant where Keisha had once worked was no longer in business. It had shut down within months of her firing, a victim of the outrage that followed her story going viral. But Keisha didn't dwell on that. She had moved on. To bigger and better things. She stood outside a new cafe, a small, cozy place in the city that she had helped fund through the program. A cafe that hired students and young adults who needed a second chance. She watched as a young woman in a crisp apron took orders with a smile, a familiar look in her eyes, hope. Keisha knew that feeling. She had once been that girl. She turned as someone stepped beside her. Melania Trump. Keisha smiled. I still can't believe you did all this for me. Melania shook her head. You did this for yourself, Keisha. She looked at the cafe. And now you're doing it for others. Keisha swallowed, emotion welling up in her chest. She had spent her whole life thinking she was meant to struggle. But now she knew better. She wasn't just a girl who had been fired. She was a leader, a mentor, a fighter. And this was only the beginning. She turned back to Melania, her voice filled with certainty. This is just the start. I want to do more. Melania smiled. I know you will. And as Keisha stepped forward, ready to walk into her new life, she knew it too. She had fought for herself. Now she would fight for everyone else. And she would never stop.